ॐ विश्वन्दर्पणदृश्यमाननगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्वोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नारायणं पद्मभूं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वार्तिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठं अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे नमः श्रीपरमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रियब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् ॐ We will start with the Mangala Shloka. Vasudevendra Yogindram Natva Jnanapradam Gurum Mumukshunam Hitathaya Tattva Bodho Bhidhiyate. I welcome you all to the 47th class of the Fundamentals of Vedanta series. The Tattvabodha gave out the essence of Vedanta in the Sutra Vakyam Atma Satyam Tadanyat Sarvam Mithyeti. That you are of a higher order of reality and everything else is in a lower order of reality. You are the Satyam and Tadanyat Sarvam Mithyeti. Everything else belongs to a lower order of reality. And some time back, we had looked at Bhagavad-pada Shankaracharya's summarization of Vedanta in one verse, where Bhagavad-pada said, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. So there too it's saying the same thing. Once we come to the recognition that I am Brahman, we have not come to that part of Tattvabodha yet. We can replace Brahman by the word Aham or Atma. And therefore, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya is equivalent to Aham Satyam Jagan Mithya or Atma Satyam Jagan Mithya. This is the essence of Vedanta, presented by Bhagavad-pada Shankaracharya also. And this understanding itself is moksha, because a thing in a lower order of reality cannot affect the one who is in a higher order of reality. Whatever is in a higher order of reality is unaffected. That is why the gold is never affected by the coming and the going of the bangle or the ring or the necklace. The gold remains untouched. The dream can never affect the waker. The mirage water can never wet the sand. So an understanding of this itself is moksha, because one becomes liberated of everything. Problems that can arise out of these mithya sources, one becomes liberated from that, because From the perspective of the higher order of reality, there are no problems at all. Because it's utterly unaffected. So the coming and going of the mithya vastus, changing mithya vastus, decaying and dying mithya vastus, none of that can touch the Satya. So this understanding itself is moksha. One becomes free of all these apurnatvams that can arise out of mithya vastus if we were to take the mithya vastus to be real. And therefore one discovers one's own purnatvam. This is moksha. But as we said, that when we hear this message, we are not able to take it in. Because I say, I am affected by so many things. How can you say I am not affected? And Vedanta points out that the reason you are saying so is because you have not really understood what this I is. You have been using this word I all your life without understanding what it really refers to, what it really means. So, in your understanding of I, you have mixed up Atma and Anatma. You have mixed up the Satyam and Mithya, and that is why you are saying you are affected. If you were to look at yourself as the Satyam, that is free of all these Mithyas, then you know that you are not affected by anything. Then the student asks, okay, then, if you are telling me that I have misunderstood the Atma, you correct my understanding of the Atma, you correct my understanding of who I am. Therefore, sthula sukshma karan sharirat vyatiriktah panchakoshatitas san avasthatraya sakshi sachidananda swarupa sanyasthishtati sa Atma. So 11 anatmas are negated. Why are they negated? Because those 11 anatmas are what I tend to mix up in my vision of who I am. I tend to mix up Atma and Anatma. Now, Tattvabodha presented a unique logic for negating these anatmas, which we saw in the last class. Tattvabodha says, whatever I refer to as my, that cannot be me, that cannot be I. For example, my bangle, my earrings, my house. I refer to all of these as my. Madiyam, madiyam, madiyam. So whatever I refer to as madiyam, as mine, that belongs to me and hence is necessarily different from me. And I understand all of this and commonly when I interact with the world, I have no confusion about this. But then when it comes to the anatmas that constitute the individual, I say, my shariratrayam, my koshapanchakam, my avasthatrayam. All of these I look upon as mine. And then I somehow mix up Atma and Anatma with that. Therefore, Tattvabodha says, you say my shariram, shariram, madiyaha pranaha, madiyam manascha, madiya buddhihi, madiyam ajnanam. So all of these panchakoshas you are addressing as mine. Each of these koshas you are saying is mine. That whatever you are saying is mine is not you. That is the Viveka that Tattvabodha presents. So then the student asks, then you have negated everything I know. Whatever I was calling I, you seem to have negated all of that. Then what is left? What do I call as I? Because you have negated the Sharira Trayam, Stula Sukshma Karana Sharira, you have negated the Koshas, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. You have negated the Avastha Trayas, the waking, dream, and deep sleep state. You have negated everything that I was associating the I with. Then what is this I that is left? And therefore the student asks, Atma tarhi kaha. This tarhi means then. Then what is the Atma? This then implies that you have negated everything. Now I don't see what the Atma is. What are you talking about? That is where the Guru says, Atma tarhi kaha. In response to this, the Guru says, Satchidananda Swarupaha. The Atma is of the nature of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And therefore, these are three terms that we have to now understand: Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And Satyam we have extensively dealt with. And that is what, in fact, we have been starting with. Atma Satyam Tadanyat Sarvam Mithyeti. We talked about it in this class also in the beginning. So Sat Kim says Kalatrayepi Tishtati iti Sat. That which is there in all periods of time. Like, for example, the ornaments come and go, the gold always remains. Whatever is in the higher order of reality remains, the other things, the mithya vastus, come and go. So that is what he is referring to by Sat. And we'll talk more about this in the appropriate context. But we started off with Chit Kim, where he says Jnana Swarupaha. And Ananda Kaha, Sukha Swarupaha, Evam Satchidananda Swarupam Atmanam Swatmanam Vijaniyat, he says. So this Satchidananda Swarupa Atma, I have to know as the I have to know as myself. So we were looking at Chit Kim in the last class, Jnana Swarupaha. That is of the nature of consciousness. Atma is of the nature of consciousness. So you are trying to understand what it really means. We said that all of these Sharira Trayas, they are all material. Panchi Krita Pancha Mahabhutai Kritam Stula Shariram, Apanchi Krita Pancha Mahabhutai Kritam Sukshma Shariram. Sharira Dvayasya Karana Matram is the Karana Shariram. So all of these are material, and being material, they are all jada, inert. And they don't have any sentiency, just like this desk or this wall. It doesn't have any sentiency because it is made up of matter. So similarly, these bodies by themselves, these anatmas by themselves, are insentient by nature. They don't have even an iota of sentiency because they are material. So given this, how do these bodies exhibit sentiency? That is the question we discussed. We said the question is similar to how this moon that is non-luminous by nature, how does it become luminous? And it's so luminous on a Paurnami night that it can illuminate the earth. We say that when something by nature doesn't have a particular attribute, but it exhibits that attribute, then that attribute must be a borrowed attribute. Therefore, we said that the moon is exhibiting luminosity that it inherently does not possess, means that luminosity is borrowed. Borrowed from what? Whatever the moon borrows its luminosity from, again cannot be non-luminous. The lender of the luminosity has to be self-luminous. And that is why we bring in the sun, saying that the sun is self-luminous and the moon just borrows the luminosity. So similarly here, these three bodies are like the moon. They don't have any inherent sentiency. They don't have any inherent consciousness. So given this, how do they exhibit this sentiency? We say it is borrowed consciousness. Borrowed from whom? Borrowed from what? Whatever that consciousness is borrowed from cannot be another material entity, because our conclusion is that whatever is material cannot inherently have this consciousness. It cannot be a lender of consciousness because it doesn't have any to lend. And therefore, whatever is a lender of consciousness, it must not be a material entity. That is what this Atma is. It is of the nature of consciousness. It is not one of these material entities. It is not made up of matter. So, based on this sun example, sun and moon example, we came up with 5 principles of sunlight. That the sunlight is not a part, product, or property of the moon. The sunlight is an independent principle that pervades the moon. And the sunlight is not limited by the boundaries of the moon. And the sunlight continues to exist even after the moon goes. And the last one is that the sunlight that continues to exist even after the moon goes, it is existent, but we cannot transact with it. It cannot be transacted with, not because it is non-existent, but there is no medium to manifest it. So similarly, we can draw the parallels for the 5 principles of consciousness. That Atma, the consciousness, is not a part, product, or property of these 3 bodies. They don't even have an iota of consciousness as a part, as a product, or as a property. The second one is that consciousness is an independent principle that pervades the 3 bodies and makes them sentient. And the third is that consciousness is not limited by the boundaries of these 3 bodies. The fourth is that even after these 3 bodies go, consciousness continues to exist. And we know that when do these 3 bodies go? We said the Sthula Sharira comes and goes, comes during birth, goes during death. The Sukshma Sharira also comes and goes, comes during Srishti and goes during Pralayam. The Karana Sharira never comes, it is always there, but it goes on the rise of Atma Jnanam. So the coming and going of these 3 bodies doesn't affect the Atma at all because it's an independent principle. It is not a part, product, or property of these bodies. The consciousness is unaffected. And this consciousness that continues to exist even after these bodies come and go. After these bodies go, that consciousness cannot be transacted with, not because it is not there, but because there is no medium to manifest it. So these are the 5 principles of consciousness. And then we talked about every individual being a mixture of Atma and Anatma. That every individual has got these 2 components, Atma and Anatma. The Anatma is these 3 bodies or 5 koshas, however we classify it. And then there is an independent principle, which is the Atma, which is not a part, product, or property of these 3 bodies. So every individual is a mixture of matter and consciousness. Every individual is a mixture of Prakriti and Purushaha, a mixture of Apara Prakritihi and Para Prakritihi in Bhagavad Gita language, a mixture of Maya and Brahman. So every individual is a mixture of these 2. Pure consciousness itself cannot transact. Pure Anatma without the backing of consciousness also cannot transact. Every transaction in the world means there's a mixture of Atma and Anatma. Then the third point we saw is that once I become aware of this fact that I am a mixture of Atma and Anatma, then what do I identify myself with? Who am I? Am I this Anatma or am I the Atma? Now, for an Ajnani is not at all aware of the existence of this independent Atma. For him, this mixture just appears like one entity. He doesn't know that there are two separate things involved here. Therefore, he has no choice but to identify with Anatma. I am this body. What else are you talking about? I am this mind. Whatever happens to the body happens to me. Whatever happens in the mind is happening to me. This viveka is not there. Aviveka. That's why Tattva Viveka Prakaram Vakshyamaha started Tattva Bodha. I'm going to tell you the method of discriminating between the Atma and Anatma. This discrimination is absent, and therefore identification with Anatma. And as we said, identification with Anatma is the gateway to Apurnatvam. Why? Because Anatma is limited. It is the gateway to samsara, the gateway to all struggles and suffering in life. On the other hand, the person who has done this Vedanta Vichara, who has done the Shravanam, Mananam, all of the Nididhyasanam, such a person knows that now there are these two separate entities based on the Shabda Pramana of Vedanta. And therefore, now the question is, what do I identify with? Vedanta constantly encourages one to identify with the Atma, withdrawing the identification from the Anatma. Why? Because Atma is the Nitya Vastu. It doesn't come and go. When I see myself as being the Atma, that is the end of suffering. That is the key to moksha. Because the Atma, as we have said, is ever Purna. It is not affected by the coming and going of this decaying, perishing Anatma. And therefore, one never says, I am suffering, I am sad. The one who knows this will always say, I am Purna. The entire Vedantic training, if you were to use the word, is to train the mind to identify with the Atma, withdrawing the identification from the Anatma. As we said, relocating my understanding of I from the Anatma to the Atma. In fact, the I is really the Atma alone. It is only due to ignorance of the nature of the Atma that I tend to place this I in an Anatma. Because of ignorance and habit also. There are two things involved, ignorance and habit. So the first step is the ignorance has to go. That is, I is really the Atma. The second step is that the habit also has to go, which is why Nididhyasanam is required. As we saw, Bhagavad Pada says, Mano buddhya hankara chittani naham nacha shrotra jihve nacha ghrana netre nacha vyoma bhumir na tejo na vayuhu chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. So I am not all of these anatmas. Repeatedly it says. The entire Vedantic message is this: I am not any of these anatmas. I have to learn to claim that I am the Atma. And what kind of Atma? Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. So Bhagavad Pada also uses Chidananda Rupa. And Tattva-bodha also says Satchidananda Swarupa. So here we have two words, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. So we have not yet discussed the Ananda Swarupa of Atma. With this we completed our discussion of the Chit Swarupa. Atma is the nature of consciousness. And this is an independent principle, which is not a part, product or property of the three bodies. So now the question arises, what is the Ananda Swarupa? How is the Atma Ananda Swarupa? So here the student asks, and we read this the last time, so we are not going to read this part again. Ananda kaha? And Tattvabodha says, Sukha Swarupa. So Atma is of the nature of Ananda, Sukha Swarupa. It is the source of happiness. All this happiness that we experience, Atma is really the source of all that. We will look into this in more detail because we have to be careful with the translation. If we take this happiness to be a literal thing, then the pursuit of Vedantic study can become the pursuit of some kind of experiential happiness. And Pujya Swamiji is very particular about saying that Vedantic study should not become an attempt to gain some particular experience. That is not the goal of Vedanta. The goal of Vedanta is not some particular mystic or otherwise experience. Experience is not the goal. But Vedanta analyzes all of our experiences, universal experiences that all of us have, and then points out certain truths that help us revise the conclusions about who I am, what the world is, and who Ishvara is. So the aim of Vedantic study is to revise all of my conclusions that were wrong conclusions based on aviveka. And when the wrong conclusions are revised itself, then one is liberated from these wrong conclusions, wrong notions. Wrong notions go away. And that going away of the wrong notions itself is the Purnatvam, because Purnatvam is my own nature. It is not something that has to be gained. This is what we have been repeatedly saying. So we should not mistake that this Sukha Swarupa means that I have to gain the experience of some particular Sukham. And that is the topic we are going to discuss today. It will come as a part of that. So we will try to understand what this happiness is, because we are talking about, because our understanding of happiness is this experiential happiness. And as we said, that this happiness is the desire behind all desires. Whatever I desire, if we ask why I desire that, eventually the answer will be, I want to be happy. So happiness is so central. The pursuit of happiness is so central in all our pursuits. In fact, it is the pursuit behind every pursuit, the desire to be happy. So we have to understand what this happiness is that we are talking about, because there is a lot of avivekaha, there's a lot of misunderstanding associated with happiness. The first idea we have is that objects in the world, they possess some kind of happiness. And when we talk about objects, we are really referring to possessions, people, situations, relationships. So they are the ones that possess, they are the ones that give me happiness. This idea is there. A very powerfully entrenched idea in our minds, that I always get happiness from people, objects, situations, relationships. And Vedanta demolishes this idea. It destroys this idea. And Vedanta gives four powerful arguments that we have to dwell upon. It takes a lot of the discussion that we are going to have today is not some insight that we can gain in a flash. It is not an insight that we can gain in an hour or two, but it requires constant thinking and dwelling about this until the truth of it strikes one. That is how a lot of the Vedantic insights become our insights. They are not just something that we read and keep it aside. Whatever we have studied, whatever we have heard, that has to reverberate in my mind. I have to constantly dwell upon it. Saying Vedanta says this, why am I not able to understand it? That kind of an attitude is required until one begins to have a breakthrough in understanding. So, this idea that I get happiness from things and beings of the world is strongly entrenched in my mind. And therefore, Vedanta presents four arguments that tell me why this is not the case. See, firstly, there is no ingredient called happiness that gets added to objects when objects are created. For example, there may be some eatable thing. Now, if it really had something called happiness, then you should be able to see it under some microscope or something. It has potassium, it has calcium, all of that we can see under a microscope or through some chemical reactions on that object. But the fact that an object has happiness, nobody can point out, here, look, here is the happiness in this object. When you see the list of ingredients, it may say 9% protein, 10% fat. It doesn't say 6% happiness there. So you cannot point out something called happiness in that object. The second thing is, if the object had something called happiness in it, then it should uniformly give happiness to everybody who comes in contact with that object. But we see violations of this every day. For example, we have discussed this before, there is parikai sambar, bitter gourd sambar. Now there are some people who love sambar, no matter what the sambar contains, as long as it's called sambar, then they will just eat it. So they love parikai sambar also. They ask, how is it that you don't like it? But then there are lots of people who just put this in their mouth and they say, what is this? It's bitter. So the parikai sambar inherently had happiness that it gave to the lovers of sambar. Then it should have uniformly given happiness to everybody, but that's not the case. Similarly, Vicharasagara gives the example of a male snake. Now, this female snake is very happy on sighting the male snake. And perhaps some human beings, like snake charmers, when they see this male snake, they may think, now I can add this to my display of snakes that I can carry around and show to people. And perhaps that person would also be happy, or a snake researcher may be happy on seeing a male snake because it gives him some subject for research. But then the majority of the humanity will probably run away from there, screaming. So if the male snake had something called happiness, which it really gave the female snake, why is it that so many people run away from it? Then the third argument is that if an object inherently had something called happiness, then it should uniformly give happiness to the one who possesses it also. And when we say object, again, I would like to repeat that it's not just objects, but it can be objects, situations, people, relationships. Basically, the world. The idea of the world gives me happiness. So now we see in our own experience that this is also not true. Maybe there's an initial honeymoon period, as they call it, when one first comes in contact with with, it may be a person or a situation or an object or a relationship, whatever, then there is an initial period of euphoria and some excitement and happiness and all that. There is experiential happiness in that. But our experiences, our universal experiences, that this happiness fades away over time. There is this law of diminishing returns. With every passing day, week, month, year, the incremental happiness that you get out of it is reduced. The novelty factor fades away. The initial, it loses the initial sheen that it possesses. And then after a while, boredom sets in. And then one starts to look for something else. We have seen this when people go to some new place as a tourist. And there is this place to see, that place to see. For a few days, everybody is taking pictures. And after the fourth or fifth day, now what else is there here? Okay, there is nothing more. It looks like we have covered all the places. That's the end of it. Then one has to move on. One is thinking about where to go next. So this is the third argument. And the fourth is that if really objects and people and transactions and relationships and situations were necessary for me to derive happiness, then happiness in deep sleep would have been impossible. In deep sleep, the world is not there. But I am very happy in deep sleep. How is that? So these are the arguments that Vedanta gives. And even in meditation, where I attain a certain quietude of the mind, there is some peace and joy and happiness in that. How is that possible without contacting any sense objects? And therefore, Vedanta asserts that the objects and world, this idea that the objects of the world are giving me happiness, that is again a mix-up. There has been a terrible mix-up. And this is the foundation on which the majority of the humanity is basing their lives. Pursuit of objects. Because according to them, that is the only way to gain this happiness that they are seeking. Okay, so if the world has been eliminated, if there is nothing inherently called happiness in the objects of the world, in the beings of the world, then where does this happiness arise from? So can it arise from this body and the mind? So we eliminated the world. So again, Vedanta points out that this body is material. Panchamahabhutaiः kritam panchikrita Panchamahabhutaiः kritam. This body is panchikrita Panchamahabhutaiः kritam. This mind is apanchikrita Panchamahabhutaiः kritam. Still all material. This body has got all this calcium and potassium, iron, and all of these, as we said, there are various materials from the periodic table. This is what constitutes the body. There is no happiness in these Panchamahabhutas inherently. They are all inert. This is an assemblage of the Panchamahabhutas. Where is the happiness in the body? And if we think that the body gives happiness, Vedanta says just wait a few years. And as one grows older, the same body that one took to be a source of happiness, that same body will become a source of sorrow also. Similarly, the mind. There are a lot of people who take to drinking, etc. The reason they do that is to numb the mind in order to forget their anxiety and worries and tensions and stress. We ask them, is the mind the source of happiness? They will say no. And even if we logically look at it, the mind is also material, as Vedanta points out. Apanchīkrita pancha mahabhutai kritam. Being matter, it has no inherent consciousness. It has no inherent happiness either. So you eliminated the world, this body and the mind. We have eliminated all of anatma. Vedanta says that no anatma inherently has this ananda. So if no anatma inherently has this ananda, but we do experience happiness in the mind. The mind becomes happy now and then. Not always, there is not no constant happiness in the mind. In our general experience, the mind becomes happy now and then. So if the mind becomes happy now and then the question is, what is the source of the happiness that we experience in the mind? So the answer, we go back to our moon example. The moon is non-luminous, but then luminosity appears in the moon. How does it appear? He said it is borrowed luminosity. So similarly, the happiness appears in the mind, which is inherently doesn't have anything called happiness being anatma, being material. So how does this happiness appear in the mind? Vedanta says that is also borrowed happiness. It is not originally in the mind. It is borrowed. So then the question is, where is it borrowed from? We have eliminated all the anatmas as being source of this happiness. What is left is Atma. Vedanta asserts that Atma is the only source of Ananda, the only source of this happiness. Which means that you are the only source of the happiness that you are experiencing. You are the only source. Atma is you or I, however we look at it. So this is a mind-boggling truth that Vedanta brings out. That all this experiential happiness that you make so much ruckus about, where does it originate from? It originates from you. So the Atma, its nature is this fullness, completeness, wholeness, limitlessness. That alone appears as this experiential happiness in the mind. But it doesn't always appear. Why is that? So we say that when there are desires present in the mind, and there are desires in the mind, that means that I want to change something, I want to acquire something, or I want to get rid of something. I'm a wanting person at that time. And when this wanting, desiring person is there, who wants to change the setup in some way, because I'm not comfortable with the setup, then in that state of mind, this wholeness and fullness and limitlessness of the Atma doesn't manifest as happiness. Because this is a rajasa vritti, this desire to change something. I'm not comfortable with this. I have to acquire something or get rid of something. In that kind of a setup, where I have this rajasic vritti in my mind, then that is not capable of manifesting this wholeness, fullness, limitlessness of the Atma. But then, when a particular desire is accomplished, there may be various reasons why that happens. It may be just due to my past karma, that a particular sense object appears and then I have a contact with that sense object that I was desiring. Or it may be because I have used my karmendriyas and accomplished some karmas because of which I have acquired a particular object. So at that point, when a desire is accomplished, at that point, this Rajasa vritti, this wanting person goes, this desiring vritti goes from the mind. This is the change in the matter constituting the mind. It's all material changes. When we say vritti, it's only material. Subtle material configuration changes happen in the mind. Subtle matter changes in the mind. The Rajasa vritti is replaced by a tripti vritti, a vritti of contentment, which is what we also call Priya, Moda, and Pramoda in the discussion of the Anandamaya Kosha. So when this Tripti Vritti comes, that is a Satviki Vritti. It is made of Sattva. And that Vritti is capable of reflecting, borrowing this limitlessness, wholeness, fullness that is the nature of the Atma. It gets reflected in the Tripti Vritti. And that is what we call my experiential happiness. So the Atma, the nature of the Atma is this wholeness, fullness. It doesn't ever come and go. Even at the time of the desiring vritti, the Atma is full and complete, limitless. But then it doesn't manifest in the mind. That's all. When this desiring vritti is quenched with the acquisition of the sense object, at that point, this Atmananda gets reflected in the mind. So Vedanta talks about this in a step-by-step fashion. So what happens is we don't understand the entire process by which experiential happiness arises in the mind. So we wrongly attribute the arising of this experiential happiness to the object. So let us go through this step by step. So whenever I see or acquire or experience an object of my liking, to see, acquire or experience an object of my liking, then this Priya, Moda or Pramoda Vritti arises in the mind. Because in the absence of this object, there was a Rajasic Vritti, this desiring Vritti that I have to see this object of my liking, I have to acquire it, I have to experience it. But the moment I see it, the Vritti is changing its shade. From Rajasa Vritti, it moves towards a more Sattvika Tripti Vritti. That is why there are these degrees of happiness. So what happens now is that this shade of tripti vritti has arisen in the mind either because of seeing, acquiring, or experiencing an object. Now, when this vritti arises in the mind, this is a conducive state of mind. So the sense object contact led to a conducive state of mind. And in this conducive state of mind, my Atmananda, this limitlessness, wholeness, fullness of Atma, it gets reflected. It manifests. When we say it gets reflected, it means that in that state of mind, my wholeness and fullness is manifesting. And this is what we call experiential happiness. So there are 4 steps. One is sense object contact. That leads to a conducive state of mind. That leads to a reflection in the mind of my nature, that is Atmananda. Ananda being my nature. This limitlessness, wholeness, fullness being my nature. And then the 4th is this experiential happiness. So there are 4 steps: sense object contact, conducive state of mind, reflection of Atmananda, manifestation of my own Ananda, that is. And the fourth is the experiential happiness. But I am not aware of the middle two steps. So I just connect the sense object contact with the experiential happiness. And I tend to think that the experiential happiness is coming through the sense object contact. And this is a terrible misconception, a terrible misunderstanding. That is why Vedanta gives this example of the dog chewing on a bone. We have discussed this example before in other contexts. So this bone is bone dry. It is tasteless. It doesn't have anything in it. Anything tasty in it. There is nothing like that. But this dog, it puts the bone in the mouth. Bone contact has happened. And now what happens? It bites on the bone and the bone lacerates. The bone is a bit rough in places. So when it's biting on the bone, it lacerates its own mouth. And when the mouth is lacerated, then the mouth begins to bleed. Blood oozes out of its own mouth. And then it sucks the blood. That's the fourth stage. So there are four stages involved: bone contact, laceration of the mouth, blood oozing out of the mouth, and then the dog sucking its own blood, saying it's so tasty. But the dog is not aware of the middle two steps. It just says bone contact leads to tasty blood. And then it keeps sucking on the bone, thinking that this taste is coming from the bone. So this is the dog's logic. That the bone leads to blood, tasty blood. But the human beings are not much better than the dog, because they are saying the sense object contact leads to the happiness. The sense objects possess happiness. The dog says that the bone possesses something tasty called blood. Here the human being says the sense object possesses something called happiness. So here, this is something that takes a lot of reflection and a lot of dwelling upon to really see the truth of this. There are only two things involved in the arising of this experiential happiness: the object and the subject. So once we eliminate that the object has happiness, then it should be the subject from whom the happiness is arising, as Sherlock Holmes says. Once you have eliminated all that which is impossible, once you have eliminated all that which is impossible, then whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. So this happiness is really arising out of the subject, meaning out of me. That means I am the source of this happiness. This is the law of exclusion. We have excluded everything that is impossible. Whatever is left must be the truth. Therefore, we have eliminated all the objects. Therefore, the subject, the Atma, the I, must be the source of this happiness. And that is why Atma Sukhaswarupaha Tattvabodha is saying. So the nature of happiness. So here, one can raise an objection. Using the same law of exclusion, one can raise a powerful objection here. And the objection is as follows: that you are saying the subject and the object are required for this experiential happiness. They are coming together. And you are saying that, okay, we have eliminated the objects as being the source of the happiness. And therefore, whatever is left must be the source of happiness. So the subject is the source of happiness. But I'll use the same law. And I will prove to you that the subject is the source of sorrow also. So the objectionist says that objects don't inherently possess sorrow also. For example, this male snake that we discussed, it gives sorrow to so many people. But the male snake gives happiness to that female snake. So you cannot say the male snake inherently possesses sorrow also. Because if it inherently possessed sorrow, it should have given the female snake also sorrow. The Parikai Sambhar gave sorrow to so many people. You cannot say it inherently possesses sorrow because it gives happiness to some of these people also, the Sambhar lovers. So objects don't have inherently sorrow also. And now you yourself have been talking for so long that this mind, this sukha dukkhadi bhoga sadhanam. And why is this sukshma shariram the sukha dukkhadi bhoga sadhanam? Because it establishes contact with the world and it leads to sukha and dukkha. So this dukkha is also arising because of contact with the world only. Because of contact with sense objects, the dukkha also arises. Now, the objects inherently don't possess any dukkha. As we have said, the male snake inherently doesn't have any dukkha. The parikai sambhar inherently doesn't have any dukkha. But through subject and object contact, the dukkha is also arising. Therefore, the subject is the cause of dukkha. So, Atma dukkha swarupam, he argues, using the same law of exclusion. So, how do you explain that? So, Vedanta says it appreciates this question. And it says that you have dwelt upon this. I'm very happy that you're asking this question. And Vedanta agrees that you are the source of the sukha also, and you are the source of the dukkha also. Both. So the objects inherently don't have any sukha also, don't have any dukkha also. So then he jumps up and down and he says, now that you have accepted this, right? So now I have proved you wrong. Vedanta says, let's not rush this. You talked about two things, right? You are saying there is Atma is the source of sukha. We talked about that, and now you are saying Atma, you yourself are the source of the dukkha also. Now the question is, which is the swarupa? What is the nature of Atma? Is it sukha swarupa or dukkha swarupa? That is the question. Now these two are opposite attributes. They cannot coexist in the same locus. So heat and cold, for example, cannot coexist in the same object. Light and darkness cannot coexist in the same object. Similarly, this sukha and dukkha cannot coexist in the same object. Because the object can have only one as its nature, it cannot have both as the nature. That doesn't make any sense. So now the question is, what is the nature of Atma? Can dukkha swarupa be the nature of Atma? So Vedanta asserts that the nature of Atma is Sukha Swarupa only, not this Dukkha Swarupa. Because whatever is my nature, I am comfortable with it. So we can take this example of health. So if there is ill health, then ill health is foreign to me. I try to remove the ill health whenever it is there. I'm not comfortable being not healthy. So health can be viewed as my nature. So whenever there is some foreign thing that comes in, I try to eliminate it. Similarly, if some particle goes into my eye, then with this foreign particle, I cannot be comfortable. There's a lot of irritation. I try to remove it. In fact, the eyes themselves try to remove it because there are these tears that come out. Or these foreign germs enter the body tries to expel it because it's not natural for the body to have that. So similarly, if sorrow was my nature, I would be very comfortable being sorrowful. So I would try to get more sorrow in my life, saying that I want to try to add more sorrow because that's what makes me comfortable. One may say that for the past week I have been very sorrowful, feels really great. One would say that. And one would complain if there is happiness. I don't know why I'm feeling so happy these days. I have to try to remove this happiness. One would actually be very uncomfortable being happy. And in deep sleep, one would have experienced sorrow because nothing else is there other than the Atma and the Karana Sharira. In deep sleep, nothing else is there. So if everything else, all the possible causes of sorrow are eliminated, and if Atma was the only source of sorrow, Atma was Dukha Swarupa, then in deep sleep I should have felt very sorrowful. In meditation, nobody would meditate. Or maybe one would meditate saying that I want more sorrow, feeling sorrowful. So this would lead to a lot of contrary things that we cannot explain. Therefore, Vedanta asserts that Atma is only Sukha Swarupam, not Dukha Swarupam. The powerful argument is that in deep sleep also I experience Sukha. Where does that Sukha come from in the absence of all object? It comes from me only. And that me is the nature of Sukha. So now the question is, if we establish that Atma is Sukha Swarupam, then how do we explain this sorrow, this experience of sorrow? So we say that Atma is Sukha Swarupam, but that Dukkha can appear in Atma. It can appear in Atma. How can it appear in Atma? If Atma is Sukha Swarupam, how can it appear in Atma? The answer is that's because of Ajnanam, because of Adhyasa. How does the snake appear in a rope? A rope is rope Swarupa. How does the snake appear in it? Because of Ajnanam, because of Adhyasa. The crystal is colorless, but how does it appear to be red in color? Because of Ajnanam, because of Adhyasa. Because of not knowing the nature of something, one superimposes what is not that on that. Because of not knowing the rope, one superimposes the snake, meaning one mistakes it to be a snake. Because of not knowing the nature of the crystal as being colorless, one mistakes it to be colored. And in the Ajnana Avastha, it will appear to be real. This dukkha appearing in Atma is because of Ajnanam and because of Adhyasa. So, the objects themselves don't have any happiness or sorrow, as we have said. And the Atma is the nature of Sukha Swarupa. So, how does the dukkha arise? Because of Ajnanam, I mix up the Atma and Anatma. And I start to say, I am this and this is mine. So, there is an idea, I am this body, I am this mind. This idea has arisen because of ajnanam and because of adhyasa, because of ignorance and because of superimposition. And this is mine. I take some of these objects to be mine. That is again because of ajnanam and because of adhyasa, not knowing the true nature of the Atma. So it is a mix up that results in sorrow because I am taking something limited, something perishable, something decaying, something dying to be me. And similarly, I am also saying that these perishing, changing, decaying, dying things are mine. This idea of me and mine is rooted in ajnanam and adhyasa. And therefore, sorrow appears in Atma. I start to say, I am sorrowful, I am suffering. So, this is the source of sorrow. This mix up. Again, we come back to the same aviveka. Mix up of Atma and Anatma is what leads to the sorrow, what leads to the suffering. The objects inherently themselves don't have sorrow. We tell the Purva Pakshi, you are 100% right there. We tell the person who raised the objection, you are 100% right there. The objects themselves don't have happiness. The objects themselves inherently don't have something called sorrow. But the Atma is Sukha Swarupa. The Atma has no trace of sorrow. It is not Dukkha Swarupa at all. This idea of dukkha, this notion of dukkha, that I have dukkha, only arises because of mix-up of Atma, that is limitless, with this limited, perishing anatma. And therefore, Atma is Sukha Swarupa only. That is why Tattvabodha is saying Sukha Swarupa. So now there is this question. We started off with this experiential happiness. So how is the experiential happiness different from the Swarupananda of Atma? This nature of Atma, that is Ananda. What are the differences between these? Well, we said this experiential happiness is Anandamaya Koshaha. So another word for it is Koshananda. Because it's Ananda associated with a Kosha. So it can be called Anandamaya Kosha or Koshananda. And the nature of Atma is called Swarupananda. It is the very nature of Atma, limitlessness, wholeness, fullness. What is the difference between these two? So as we said, this Koshananda is experienced in deep sleep. Because there is experiential happiness in deep sleep. Aham kimapi na janami sukhena maya nidra anubhuyate. I experienced happiness in sleep. I slept happily. This is our universal experience. And that is why everyone loves deep sleep also. So this is one part of the Anandamaya Kosha. Then the second part of the Anandamaya Kosha that we discussed is this Priya, Moda and Pramoda vrittis that arise in waking or dream state. By seeing an object of my desire, by acquiring an object of my desire, by experiencing an object of my desire. So this is what constitutes Koshananda. So now the first point to note is that this Koshananda, Anandamaya Kosha, is experiential happiness. It is experienced. But this Swarupananda, Atmananda, being I myself, it is not experienced. So this is the first point. It is the very nature of Atma. So we can look at this We can appreciate the differences better if we take this example of my face being reflected in a mirror. I stand in front of a mirror and I see my reflected face in the mirror. So now what is the difference between the reflected face and the original face? The first difference is that the reflected face is a reflection. It is a copy. It is not the original. The original face is here outside the mirror. That is the first difference. Then the second difference is that the reflected face is experienced by me. The original face is not experienced. I can only see a reflection of my face. I can never see my original face. In fact, my whole life, I have not seen my original face at all. This point is worth thinking about for some time. My whole life, I have not seen my original face. In fact, any face of mine that I have seen is only a reflection or an image of my original face, never the original. This is the second point. The reflected face is experienced. Only a reflected face is experienced. The original face is never experienced. This is the second point. Then the third point is that the reflected face has got gradations. For example, it depends on the nature of the reflecting medium. That if the mirror is somewhat dusty, then I look in that, I see a very unclear reflection of my face. Or the mirror is distorted. Sometimes I see my face contorted like a very long face, or sometimes you see a very broad face. That all depends on the reflecting medium. Or sometimes you take a hot water shower and then this mirror becomes very misty. And then you have to wipe the mirror to see your own face. So the reflection, the gradation, there are gradations or degrees in the reflection. And that depends on the nature of the reflecting medium. Whereas the original face doesn't have any gradations. There's no question of gradations in the original face. This is the third point. First point is a reflection is a reflection, the original is different. The second point is the reflection is experienced. In fact, only the reflection is experienced, the original is never experienced. The third point is that the reflection has got these gradations based on the reflecting medium, whereas the original doesn't have any gradations. Then the fourth point is that the reflection arrives and departs because it depends on the reflecting medium being there. Whereas the original never arrives and departs. The mirror may come and go, but the original face doesn't come and go. I don't cry if the mirror breaks, saying I have lost my face. I don't do that because I know my face is intact even if the mirror breaks. So now one may ask, if the original face is never experienced, then what is the proof that it is there? For example, imagine a person who is stranded on some island since a child and he has not had any interaction with humans at all. So now he has only seen a reflection of his face. Nobody has told him your face looks like this and so on. He has only seen a reflection of his face. So now if he asks a question, what is the proof that my original face is there? We tell him that the reflection is the proof of your original. If the original wasn't there, you would not have seen the reflection at all. The fact that you're seeing your reflected face means your original face is there. So this is the example of the reflected face and the original face. And now we can draw parallels here to Koshananda and Atmananda. This Koshananda is a reflection of Atmananda in the reflected medium known as the mind, or Anandamaya Kosha. The Anandamaya Kosha, when the mind is in a conducive state, either in deep sleep or Priya Moda Pramoda Vritti, it reflects Atmananda. So this Koshananda is just a reflection of Atmananda. Whereas Atmananda is the original, not the copy. My wholeness, my fullness, my completeness is the Atmananda. Limitlessness is the Atmananda that manifests as this reflected happiness in a conducive state of mind. The reflected happiness, Koshananda, is a reflection, not the original. The original is this wholeness, fullness, completeness, limitlessness of the Atma. And the second point is that Koshananda or Anandamaya Kosha is experienced happiness. Whereas this Atmananda, this Atma of the nature of Ananda, I can never experience it as an object. Why? Because it is I the experiencer. We have seen this Dridrishya Viveka. I the experiencer, I the knower, am always different from the known experienced entities. Those are addressed as this, and Atma is addressed as I. The I can never be a this. Therefore, the Atmananda itself can never be an experienced object. And whatever is experienced Ananda, that is Koshananda, never the Atmananda. This is the second point. Just like this, whatever phase I experience is only a reflected phase, never the original. And the third point in the mirror example was that this reflection has got gradations based on the state of the reflecting medium. Similarly, this Koshananda, which is a reflection of Atmananda, a manifestation of Atmananda that is experienced, it has got degrees. Priya, Moda, Pramoda. Then the fourth point is that this Koshananda is subject to arrival and departure. Koshananda, this experienced Ananda, is always subject to arrival and departure because I may go into deep sleep, I come out of deep sleep. I may have a Priya Vritti for some time on seeing my desired object, on acquiring the desired object, there is Moda Vritti, on experiencing the desired object, there is Pramoda Vritti. So all of these vrittis also come and go. Therefore, the reflected medium comes and goes. And therefore, this Koshananda also comes and goes. In fact, happiness experienced even in the Samadhi avastha. Even in the Samadhi, any experienced happiness is only Koshananda. No matter what avastha one may be in. Sushupti, Samadhi, Priya Vritti, Moda Vritti, Pramoda Vritti. Because it's experience, it cannot be the experiencer. Therefore, whatever is experienced is Koshananda only. And it is subject to arrival and departure. So now the question is that if the original Atmananda can never be experienced, what is the proof that it is there? Similar to the question of my original phase is never experienced, what is the proof it is there? We said that the very fact that you see your reflection is the proof that you are the source of it, you are the original. So similarly, this Koshananda that I experience is the proof that the original Atmananda is there. If the original Atmananda was not there, this Koshananda would have been impossible because nowhere else we find this Ananda. So whenever I am enjoying Koshananda, whenever I experience Ananda, I should understand that I am the source of it. Just like this dog getting the realization that what I have been sucking so far in this bone is only my own blood. This bone doesn't have anything. This is the difference between the Koshananda and Atmananda. And then the question arises, Lord, how do I gain this Ananda? How do I gain the Ananda? So then there are two possibilities that you can be talking about. Are you talking about Koshananda or are you talking about Atmananda? So let us take Koshananda first. How do I gain Koshananda? How do I gain experiential happiness? And Vedanta says there are two methods for it. We can think about it like a balance. There are my wants and there are objects. Wants on one side and objects on the other side. Now, if the objects match my wants, then the balance is in a balance. So now, the state of mind that we are talking about, a conducive state of mind is required to reflect my Atmananda. And that conducive state of mind depends on what my wants are and what the objects are. Now, there are two ways to accomplish this balance. So either you can increase the objects to bring it into balance, or if the objects are less, I can reduce the wants and bring it into balance also. Both are possible. Either acquisition of objects or changing my internal state of mind. These are the two high-level approaches. So in one approach, one says that I have these ragas and dveshas, I have likes and dislikes, I have certain wants. And therefore, I don't have the objects corresponding to these wants, and therefore, I try to acquire these objects and try to bring my mind in balance. Basically, by satisfying every desire that arises in the mind. And this is an approach that leads to experiential happiness, there's no doubt about it. But this kind of experiential happiness will keep coming and going. And it depends on the state of the world. As we have said, the world is inherently unpredictable, unsustainable, uncontrollable. So one satisfies one desire, and then, aha, this balance has been achieved. But then the state of the world may change in such a way that some of the objects are no longer in accordance with my wants. And then again, the mind is restless. And again, one has to bring about some change in the world in order to achieve this balance. So this is one approach, but this approach is riddled with anxiety and tension. And one has to constantly be engaged in karma, trying to reconfigure the world in accordance with my likes and dislikes. And the world being inherently uncontrollable, unsustainable, things will keep changing. So one is constantly engaged in action, trying to do this, trying to do that, to try to keep this world in alignment with my likes and dislikes. So this approach no doubt gives some happiness here and there when the world is in accordance with my wants, in accordance with my likes and dislikes. But then this is also the path to samsara, because one can never get lasting fulfillment out of this. The second approach is that instead of constantly adjusting the world according to my likes and dislikes, raga, dveshas, I neutralize my own ragas and dveshas so that I can be comfortable in more and more situations. And this is the approach of karma yoga. So as we have discussed karma yoga in detail, I just don't blindly go by my likes and dislikes. I adopt the attitude of Ishvara Arpana Buddhi and Prasada Buddhi. And therefore, I act according to dharma. Whatever ragas and dveshas I have, I take it through the filter of dharma. And then I do what is right. I don't do what is adharma. I do what is dharma. So in this I develop a distance from my ragas and dveshas. And then when there are experiences in the world, I adopt an attitude of prasada buddhi, saying all of this is coming from Ishvara. So there is no jumping up and down if the result is in keeping with my likes and dislikes, and there is no depression also if the result is not in keeping with my likes and dislikes. I am willing to accept both with an attitude of surrender, with an attitude of prasada buddhi. And when I do this, I develop a distance from my own likes and dislikes. The mind is no longer a reacting mind. The frequency of negative reactions, the intensity of negative reactions, etc., comes down. And the recovery period, if at all there's a negative reaction, also comes down. This is what Swamiji calls FIR reduction. And then there's an increase in calmness, cheerfulness, and confidence that I can deal with a variety of situations in the world. Why? Because I am no longer dependent on the world for my happiness. So this is the approach of Vairagyam. In fact, this loosening of the hold of the ragas and dveshas is what is Vairagyam. I'm no longer depending on the world, no longer longing for things in the world, no longer clinging to the world. And this approach also gives Koshananda. Because one is no longer that wanting person, no longer this desiring person in all these situations. This wanting person appears less and less. This desiring person appears less and less. One is comfortable in whatever the situation is. And therefore, the mind has this through an internal change. The mind comes to this conducive situation that reflects the Atmananda. So this is also a powerful method of gaining Koshananda. But this method is not a slave of the world. And this is a gateway to moksha. This is the second method of gaining Koshananda, which is cultivating Vairagyam. So now the final question is, okay, you talked about these two methods of gaining Koshananda, but what is the method of gaining Atmananda? Because no matter Koshananda will always come and go. As we have said, Anandamaya Kosha comes and goes. A Vairagi also cannot constantly have this Koshananda. Because the mind is affected by prarabdha, body is affected by prarabdha. So the Koshananda may not always be there, even for a jnani also. What is the method of gaining this Atmananda? We say that very question saying, how do I gain Atmananda, arises from an ignorance of my nature, that my nature is Atmananda. So the only way of gaining Atmananda is to gain the Jnanam. That my nature is Atmananda. This Atmananda was never away from me. Just like the lady with the necklace on her neck. What is, if she thinks the necklace is lost, she can ask, what is the means of gaining this necklace? But we tell her the only means of gaining something that is already accomplished is to know that it's already accomplished, that the necklace is on your neck. So only method of gaining Atmananda is to know that I, the Atma, am of the nature of Ananda. And such an Atmananda never comes and goes. The Koshanandas in the two approaches that we talked about, pursuing objects of the world, this Koshananda will come and go. And even if one adopts the approach of Karma Yoga, one cannot constantly be in the Koshananda. The Koshananda will come and go. But the second approach is better than the first approach. But a jnani who knows that I am of the nature of Atmananda. He is no longer dependent on the Koshananda. The Koshananda may come and go, the experiential Ananda may come and go, but he is very clear that whether the experiential Ananda comes and goes, just like whether the reflected face comes and goes, nothing happens to the original face. So similarly, whether this Koshananda comes and goes, my original Ananda is intact because it is of the nature of Atma. It is my nature. The Atma is full, whole, complete, limitless. And this can never leave the Atma. This Atmananda is my nature. And the Jnani revels in this Ananda, this Jnanam, that Atmananda is my nature. And this Jnanam, dwelling upon the Jnanam in Nididhyasanam, itself can also give Koshananda. We can call this Jnanananda. He gains this experiential happiness from the knowledge that I am of the nature of happiness in Nididhyasana. Therefore, the Jnani is unaffected by the coming and going Koshananda because he has understood that I am limitless, whole, full and complete. I am Ananta, limitless, and therefore I am of the nature of Ananda that never comes and goes. Therefore, the only means of gaining the Atmananda is through Jnanam, that I am the limitless, full, whole, complete Atma, irrespective of whatever happens in the world. With this, I'll conclude our discussion today. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om